What I'm going to show you, I'm going to teach you, you might be thinking, what in the world is this lady on? This cannot be part of discipleship because it's so out there. But I'm going to try to bring it around for you so you can see how important it is to know this information. But it begins basically when you were a child. So we're going to actually go all the way back there and take it from that point on. So let me share my screen with you. So I want to talk about what's called attachment theory and the formative power of community. Attachment theory is a psychological term, and I don't know if many of you have heard of it. I had not even really necessarily heard about it until I did the program with Kima. And what I learned was really transformative and basically kind of shaped my whole master's capstone project and everything surrounding that. Basically, it really spoke to me so deeply about the wounding we carry from our own parents, and it's relatively unaddressed. So that's how I kind of came upon this. But I was so undone after this teaching that I had to go home and apologize to my own kids for the way that I had parented them, knowing that I was carrying on these generational issues, and then try to figure out, okay, now how can I redo this? So you might be wondering what this is about. So I think from recently you've been learning more about God from an external and kind of a cognitive perspective. This is a way to look within ourselves to see what the subconscious operating system working inside of us is doing in the background of who we are. So we're actually not going to look outward, but we're going to look inward into what is going on inside of us that is actually affecting how we think and how we relate to others, both in community and in our families. So as you can see, we inherit things like hair color, eye color, height, different personality quirks, different things like that. But what we sometimes don't talk about is how we inherit beliefs, habits, ways of expressing ourselves. In my family, I've got some kids that are very extroverted and some that are not. And we tend to be kind of a introverted type of family. So when we're around someone who is very bold, and just is kind of out there, it really kind of throws us because that's not who we are, and that's not who my parents are, and that's not who my grandparents are. We also will inherit different ways that we cope with stress, with trauma, with disappointment, and a lot of those things we don't even know that we're doing because they're in the background of who we are. So really this is going to be just about exploring your inner world and looking at your inner map and what makes you tick, what makes you think. We think that we are looking at something with a perspective of this is how it is, but in reality, we're looking through the lenses that we are wearing. And we have to sometimes take off the glasses that we're wearing in order to see that our vision is not always 20/20. So up to 80% of our thoughts and decisions are made from within the subconscious, which is kind of below that iceberg that I showed you. When you hear some of this information, you're going to have a few reactions. One, who cares? This doesn't apply to me. Two, oh no, I never got this when I was growing up, so no wonder I am like I am. Three, oh no, I'm passing these things on to my own children. So if you are a parent today, you might be getting a double whammy, both from yourself and then how you've parented other people. And lastly, there is hope. So this is not all lost. So what is attachment theory, basically? Basically, it's your brain on a map. This is how you think and how you relate to other people. British child psychiatrist, John Bowlby, he's kind of the father of attachment theory, is kind of the originator of this. And he says that our attachment patterns become developed patterns of relating we learn from our attachment figure, or primary caregiver, which we then live by. So when I say primary caregiver, I might interchange it and say your mother. It might be your father. It could be a grandmother. It could be a collective group of people that were your primary caregivers, but it really pertains to people that were your caregivers from the time you were born to the time you were just 2 years old. So whoever that is for you, yeah.
So caregiver would be another way of saying, like, so caregiver would be people who took care of you or who nursed you from the time that you were born, when you were very young, from 0 to 12 years of age, right? So when Christy says caregiver, it's not talking about nurses somewhere out there, but it's those people that took care of you when you were first born up till we were about 2 years old. Just wanted to clarify that. Yeah. Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So attachment theory, it refers to the way that we relate to people. And there's 4 specific patterns that we can identify within ourselves. Now, once this pattern is fully formed by the time that you are 2 years old, just 2. So obviously you don't have, you can't talk usually. I mean, some babies can, of course, but you're not purposely choosing this pattern. It's being given to you by your mother or your caregiver or your father or your grandmother, whoever's taking care of you at that age. Children have a biological instinct, a God-made instinct to attach to someone because they're helpless, right? Like babies are some of the most helpless beings on the planet. So God has given us this instinct to attach. So whether their parents are loving or not, whether they're insensitive, whether they're rejecting, whether they're abusive, we will develop those coping styles based on our attempt as babies to get our needs met. So whoever that is between birth and age 2 is really determining how you are going to relate as an adult. So self-awareness and emotional intelligence are important to the maturity of the believer, right? One can have a theological education offered to them. You can have a doctorate in New Testament history, but if you haven't done the inner work of understanding how your brain has been mapped out, you can be emotionally immature and not fit to lead. An emotionally unaware leader causes spiritual wounding and damage. So this is why it's so important to know yourself, to know what is going on inside of your inner landscape, and to start working with that to heal it. So by the time you are 7 years old, the blueprint of who you are as an adult is already in place. So sometimes, we think, oh, they're just babies. What do they know? They just eat and sleep and roll over. But in reality, that brain is forming who they're going to be as an adult. So by the time a child is 7, their pattern for relating to you and to their world is already set. So our first means of learning how to regulate our attention, how to deal with our emotions, how to think about ourselves, how to think for ourselves, those are already done for us by the time we're 7.
Christy, you said, sorry, someone is asking, you said something about spiritual damage.
Oh.
Can you repeat that, what you said just there again, so that we catch that?
Sure. So an emotionally unaware leader, so someone who is not aware of their own, inner wounding or their own pain, their own unhealed damage as a child, can be a leader. But if they have not dealt with some of that internal wounding, they can cause spiritual wounding and spiritual damage to the people they are leading unknowingly. Yeah. Okay, so why should we care about something like attachment theory? Is firstly, it's going to tell you how you felt and developed as a child. It clarifies ways you are emotionally limited as an adult and what we need to change to improve our close relationships with our children and others. So some people don't realize they are emotionally limited until they get around somebody else who's quite free with their emotions. So when I was growing up, we didn't cry as children, not allowed to express your emotion because that would be disobedient or disrespectful. So then you're taught to kind of suppress all of your emotions. But the thing is, that's not healthy either. So, but those patterns continue as an adult. So then now I have to figure out, okay, what emotions can I express and how can I do it in a healthy way, not just, suppress them to the point where I'm just really, really angry and then explode, because that's not emotionally mature. So how do we act as adults, emotionally speaking? And it depends on your culture and your community as well. What do we do with emotions? This also identifies patterns in our thinking that we need to heal. As leaders, it grows our capacity for understanding and relating to others. So if you are aware of other people's backgrounds, you will know how to relate to them differently. You will know what they need and be able to relate to them in a way that is comforting or draws out the best in them, because you're not going to kind of trigger them or press buttons, to make them angry or whatever. So Christian formation can be shaped through the lens of attachment theory. It's establishing discipleship for a whole community. And so when I work in Ocean View, we work specifically through the lens of attachment theory, understanding, and most of the women that I work with come from very violent backgrounds. So, one's father was murdered, one was abandoned, one was abused. That's a very repetitive story. So understanding who their parents were and what they brought to the narrative, to their story, brought forgiveness and compassion, but it also helped them understand who they were and what they need to do to heal. It affects how we think. It affects how we feel about ourselves and others. It influences how you hear the voice of God. If you believe that God is inconsistent and unreliable, that is how God will be heard by you. And there are psychologists and authors, Christian authors, that will say that how we hear the voice of our primary caregiver or our mother or father in that first 2 years of life is actually the voice of God that we're hearing. So sometimes we interpret what we're hearing as God, but it actually is that voice that we heard as a child. So that's really interesting. So in the 1970s, there was a lady called Mary Ainsworth. Her experiment was called A Strange Situation. And it really revolved around a child being left in a room by itself and how that child reacted. And her decades of research came down to a couple questions, and that was, the child wanted to know, where is my mother, basically? Where are you in proximity to me? And can I be without you? Are you returning? And will I find safety in you? So the study observes the child's pattern of attaching and then reuniting. And that's really key because it's not about having a perfect mother or a perfect family. It's about the quality of relationship that exists that allows for a rupture or a conflict in the relationship, a fight or whatever, and then a reunion afterwards to repair that relationship. Because none of us have a perfect relationship where we never fight, we never argue, we never have misunderstandings. But but the important part is what happens after that conflict. Can you come back to that person and say, hey, we're still friends. We're still going to talk this out. I know we don't vote for the same presidential candidate, but we're going to still be friends. And this is not going to harm the relationship. There's safety in disagreeing. Because if we don't have safety to disagree with someone, that is damaging to us. Because that's not an authentic type of relationship where we can have permission to disagree, knowing that we'll be able to come back to that relationship, if that makes sense. So there's 4 different types of attachment patterns that Mary Ainsworth discovered. There's secure attachment. There's insecure ambivalent attachment, insecure avoidant attachment, and later was added disorganized attachment. So basically, we are hardwired to perceive the mind of another. So you know how babies don't talk. So they read your face, right? They read your body language. If you're yelling at a baby, the baby's going to start crying. If you are using baby talk and you're cooing at the baby, you know, the baby might smile at you. So this is all based around this kind of nonverbal language in the way that we communicate with each other. So first, let me give you some definitions of some words that are going to help define the attachment process for us. Mirror neurons. I had never heard of this word before until for some reason, I was reading my Bible and the word came to me. And I looked it up and I thought, this is phenomenal, because scientists are just now discovering that in our brains, we have these mirror neurons. And what they do is they reflect back to each other our intention of what we think about each other. So if you are, like, let's say you're walking down a dark alley or something, and all of a sudden you get a feeling like something is not right. You know, you're passing somebody and you just kind of know, like, I don't think they have the best intention toward me. That is your mirror neurons picking up their intention. And it sounds really weird, but when you look at it in the context of human behavior, we do this all the time with each other. So like, for instance, you know, if you're talking to a baby and the baby smiles at you, chances are you're going to smile back at that baby. You know, unless you're a monster, you know, and you just don't like babies, you're generally going to smile back. Or that's how human behavior starts to imitate each other. That's how a baby learns, is, you know, you hand the baby a spoon and show her how to eat, or you know, you demonstrate how to do something, the baby will mimic you as well. If you are in a happy mood, the baby will be in a happy mood. The same way, we do this the same way, like maybe in a DTS. Like, let's say the leader walks in and you notice that there's students sitting on the front row with their arms crossed and they've got, you know, headphones in, and they just don't look like they're ready to learn. So you are going to pick up on some of those nonverbal cues and kind of be able to tell what they're doing. So mirror neurons are actually located in our brains, which is phenomenal, in the premotor cortex. So when you know the intention behind an action, so if I'm the mother, I'm intending to feed my child, the baby will pick up that, oh, I'm here to feed the child. I understand there's an intention behind this action. I'm getting out the spoon, I'm getting out the bowl, I'm getting out the cereal, whatever it is. It's been so long since I've had a baby, I forget what they eat. So when we do that, a different system in our brain is activated, and so our brain starts wiring differently. The system, so when you can predict that system, you can determine the intention. Sensory implications of the motor actions create a map in our mind that correlates with the firing patterns that create a neural map of the other's intentions. So all that's saying is that over time, a baby or a child can predict what you're going to do based on the actions that they've seen you do and the intention with which you do it. So the same way, if you're mad about something, a child can actually see in your face and by your actions what's going to happen. And so we do this in community with each other as well. A community that is known to each other, the more you know each other, the more you're going to be able to read each other's intentions just by knowing each other, just by knowing the actions they take, the patterns that we have. It's this brilliant God-given thing in our brains. So with children, so back to age 2, neuroscientists actually use the word sponging in. So their little mirror neurons, because they don't have verbal language, will read ours, and then what we're thinking is actually kind of what the child will absorb. So they will kind of sponge in everything that they think we think about them. And that's why, like, in the first 2 years of life, what your primary caregiver thought about you is what you learn to believe about yourself, because that's what they were reflecting back at you. So basically it's holding up a mirror to somebody to tell them what they think, what they do, anything like that. When a child is in sync with their caregiver, his sense of joy and connection is reflected in a steady heartbeat, breathing, a low level of stress hormones, his body's calm, so are his emotions. I don't know if you've ever seen like a baby have a giant temper tantrum, you know, let's say they're screaming, you know, they're just mad, they're not having it, they're crying and crying and crying. You cannot at that moment pick up that baby and say to it, let's have a logical conversation about why you are upset. You know, there's nothing, I mean, you have got to calm that child down. And chances are very good that when you pick up that child and you hold that baby and they can feel your heartbeat, they'll listen to the sound of your voice if it's soothing. You know, you can soothe them, you regulate their hormones, they can't self-regulate. So they need someone to help do it for them. And you do that by matching each other. So they will reflect you. And then they will sense like, okay, my mom is calm right now. I'm gonna calm down. Everything starts to drop and then they can be soothed. So children learn to self-soothe by having you do it for them at first. So we don't rationally argue our way into why you shouldn't be having a temper tantrum or why you should be upset. We just help them soothe. And then when they're soothed, then we can discuss or talk about why they're upset. Sorry, my cat is stuck in here. My daughter brought home a cat. She's 22. we hadn't had the, hey, can I get a cat discussion? Or do you mind if I get a cat discussion? Just came. And it's, yeah, it's a character, I'll tell you that much. Empathy. So attunement is what that is. It's a sensation of being seen and known. So even the smallest physical levels of interaction between a baby and its mother, or the baby and its caregiver, are the feelings of being met. So when that happens over thousands of times, repeatedly, I'm upset, my mother is soothing me, she sees that I'm upset, she knows me, she sees me, she helps me, I trust her. There's hope for me getting through a trial or tragedy or trauma or whatever is in the baby's mind. He now realizes, once I'm calm, this is going to happen. My mom is here for me. I'm going to get through this. That's how a child starts to understand hope. Empathy. And you may have heard this word quite a lot. Empathy is just simply being in sync with each other. It's one of those things where, in my opinion, that the church really could do a better job of doing. It's withholding judgment from someone who is in pain or is hurting, and you are just feeling with that person. So just as a crying baby would need to be comforted, the same, that's what we do with people who are also hurting, is we just stop and soothe them, you know. It's not about fixing people, it's just about being in sync and feeling what they are feeling. So when a child is in sync with its caregiver, the sense of joy and connection is in a steady heartbeat, breathing, calmness, emotions. This moment, the moment that is disrupted, as it usually is in the course of a normal day, all these physiological factors change as well. And you can tell that a baby has come back into equilibrium when the physiology calms down. So in their little bodies, everything is stressed out. You know, I don't know if you've ever had a child that had just like went straight as a board, you know, like they didn't want to be held, every muscle was flailing, they just were not having it. But then you can tell, as soon as they're soothed, that calms down. So that's what empathy is. When we talk about empathy, that's very important. Secure attachment. So secure attachment is, it's many things. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time on this. But basically, a child that comes from a secure attachment has several several characteristics. It's not about the absence of pain. So it's not about having a childhood that was pain-free and you never had any issues and you never cried. That is not it at all. But it's about the presence of joy in the face of challenging times. So it's not about the absence of those ruptures that we talked about, but the repair and the faithful repair of those ruptures. It's about a parent or a caregiver that says, oh no, you're upset. I've done something to hurt you. How can we repair our relationship? And that's a faithful repetition. Secure attachment is not indicative of a perfect mother, thankfully, who attends like the infant's needs with a 0 fail rate. That is nonsense. That is impossible to do. I mean, I had 5 kids within the space of 6 years, and the last 2 were twins. And let me tell you, the fail rate for not attending to their needs was high. Simply because, I mean, I was just outnumbered. You just can't do it. But what matters is what happens after that rupture. Is the relationship repaired and is trust restored? So you can have a rupture or a misstep, but it's the repair that is communicated that counts. Repairing ruptures is the most essential thing in parenting. The mirror neurons will see those intentions and see that it's possible to be a human and still be full of love. So the child doesn't judge the parent as being a horrible parent because they understand the intention behind it. So what does a child need to form a secure attachment? A child needs a safe place, a place to come back to. They need emotional attachment, which goes back to the attunement of being felt and understood. They need belonging. They need nurture. So food, clothes, school supplies, you have it. Okay, so maybe birth to 2, they don't need school supplies just yet, but they will. They need trust and dependability. They need consistent communication about who they are. They need empathy, which we spoke about. They need to be seen as a child, not just a chore or not just something to be done, but they need to be seen as who they are. Someone who's sensitive to their needs consistently. They need to know that they're the sparkle in someone's eye. They need to know that they are wanted. And then, of course, they need to be held often and know they're loved. So those are just the basic things. I would add belonging. Belonging is very, very important. And the nurturing, it doesn't necessarily have to be like the best food or anything like that. It's the intention behind it. Let me just skip ahead for time quickly. So what does it look like when a child has a secure attachment growing up? How do they become an adult? What does that look like? So if you have had a securely attached childhood, you can identify with some of those things, then chances are as an adult, you learn to desire close relationships. You're not afraid of holding yourself back. You have a positive view of yourself. You feel secure if you're married and your partner's love and you trust them because your caregiver was trustworthy. You could count on them taking care of you. You yourself are capable of deep and meaningful nurturing of others. You know that you are loved and you are lovable, and you have a strong sense of identity. You are balanced emotionally because that attunement, that emotional containment, a really good mother or caregiver figure doesn't respond to your emotional outbursts as a child. You know, it's kind of like a giant platter. You're able to just get all those emotions out no matter what it looks like without somebody swatting away your emotions and arguing with you about them or telling you how silly they are or something like that. So you are pretty balanced emotionally. What does it look like if someone has a secure childhood? How do they relate to God? So a securely attached adult usually views God as a secure base. God is the rock, God's the fortress. God is perceived by them to be loving, forgiving, caring, and protective. When there is a rupture in the relationship between that person and God, God took the initiative to repair it, and they were able to repair any relationship or doubt or any issue that they have with God. They're able to repair that. They tend to adopt styles of spiritual coping where they move towards others, and this is really important because oftentimes when people are hurt, especially in a community, sometimes in a Christian community, our response is to move away from the pain. We'll turn my back. I'm going to leave this group. I'm going to leave this church. I'm going to leave YWAM. I'm going to leave the base because I'm in pain. Whereas a securely attached person has the tendency to move towards people. They're going to move towards repair, towards the reconciliation of that relationship. And it is related to better mental health. So usually less addictions, less anxiety, less depression, a greater ability to build and to live through with peace and hope. So that is what the first 2 years of your life influences you as an adult looks like. And I don't know about all of you, but I did not have a secure attachment growing up. So I heard this and I thought, I didn't have that. So now what about me? Where my issues come from? So the next category is called ambivalent attachment. And this is when your primary caregiver or your mother was unpredictable in her care. She cared, yes, but it was relatively inconsistent, not really reliable. Maybe she worked a lot, maybe she couldn't do it, maybe something else was going on, but the child interpreted that as unreliable. So I think this is important to know as well. It's not about blaming our parents for something because they were doing what they could with what they had at the time in the only way they could. And we don't know what was going on with our parents' lives, that influenced them at the time. This is just us as a child, interpreting as a child what is going on. But an ambivalent attachment, the mother will tend to use the child to satisfy her own needs. They override the baby's needs, or they don't mirror the needs back to the child. So like let's say, for instance, something very, very simple, like let's say the baby wanted to take a nap. The baby was sleeping, starting to nod off. You could see the child was getting sleepy, and the mother kept tickling the child to wake it up, because the mother wanted to play, the mother wanted to do something. Something very, very basic then can be interpreted as the mother is not paying attention to what the baby needs, but rather what she wanted to do at the time. Sometimes their responses are appropriate and nurturing, and other times they are intrusive. So it's not that they don't love the child, they do, it's just unpredictable care. Sometimes they're nurturing, sometimes they're not. So a lot of times they'll use the child to meet their own needs for love, as I said, and so the baby's signal is ignored, and consequently the baby's voice is ignored. Which translates to an adult, as you can imagine. A friend, I have some friends that are fostering kids right now, and they can see the attachment patterns being played out in the kids by the way they respond to the relationship. As ambivalent adults, this attachment.
Christy,
yeah.
Before we go to this one, can you again clarify what the word ambivalent means? Yeah,
it means unpredictable. Sometimes right, or not right. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. Just not either or. So uncertain or unpredictable. Good. So as an adult, if you identify with this attachment pattern, you can be self-critical and insecure. You can have deep-seated feelings that you're going to be rejected, and so you're automatically not trusting people. So this can, it's not that you want to be rejected, but sometimes you think already in your mind, well, I'm going to be rejected. So then when that happens, it reinforces that thought that you had. They have difficulty setting boundaries. They're difficult to soothe, even as adults. So that is where a lot of addictions come in, because they can't soothe themselves out of a situation. They have a negative self-image. They tend to suppress or devalue their own needs. So putting themselves last lost my train of thought. Putting themselves last in the line of self-care. They withdraw in relationship. They use mistrust, aggression, and hostility to keep people away. So I don't know if you've met people like this, but there's a circle around them. And when you try to get too close, you can kind of, there's an invisible boundary and you've just crossed it, because they let you know in no uncertain terms. They tend to avoid risk, which is interesting, because they don't feel they can come back to a safe place. So once they've found a safe place, they don't want to risk leaving that. Even if they are bristly or they're not happy, they won't risk leaving what they know. It feels like they will be rejected. They're just kind of waiting for that. And they generally feel unloved. They can be suspicious or distrustful of their parents, but at the same time act clingy and desperate. So can you see, like, even as a child, how one minute they don't know if they're going to get their mother's love, or the next minute they're going to be ignored, how that translates to an adult who does the exact same thing to other people. You just don't know where they're at, and you can't tell. Yeah, so inconsistent mirroring of the child's needs means I see what you feel, but I'm not going to reflect it back to you. So then their voice falls silent. The next category is it's still insecure, but it's the avoidant insecure, which means this primary caregiver, this mother, was unresponsive to primary care. Whereas the ambivalent mother would have been good sometimes and responsive, the avoidant mother tends to avoid it altogether. So the mother was unresponsive to hurt, emotionally unavailable. So I'll just give you one instance. So my mother never really allowed crying. That just wasn't a thing. You just couldn't cry. And if you cried, you got punished. So then you learn not to express yourself because there's punishment involved. So, and even if we got hurt as kids, now I have a good relationship with my mom now. Just so you know, it's good. We adore each other. And again, she was parenting out of what she knew. But, even if we got hurt as children, we got in trouble. So we got in trouble for getting hurt. If one time I got bit by a dog and I was in big trouble. So that's not being nurturing. So the mother tends to be inconsistently attuned to the child. Like you're just not getting what the child's feeling. There's just no connection there. Again, discouraged emotions. And then the child is encouraged early independence. So, as soon as you get to a certain age, you're going to be off on your own. You need to take care of yourself. Don't rely on me. Out of the house, do this. So when I left my home at 17, I moved to Chicago on my own with no job. But that was the independence. That was go be yourself, and we don't have a connection. The mother tends to avoid intimacy and connection and is unable to hold emotions. So when a child comes to you and they're really upset, like let's say they didn't get on the team selection they wanted to, and they're really upset, and they come into the house and they're just like spewing all sorts of stuff, like every imaginable injustice has happened to them, and they just let it all out. And the mother is standing there holding all of that and just lets it come out and holds it until the child is soothed. And then you can talk through, okay, what are you really upset about? But in this case, though, that display of emotions, that space for safety would not be there. Those emotions would need to be either internalized or taken elsewhere. So they're not able to hold other people's emotions either. As adults, avoidant children become disconnected. They can avoid romantic relationships. They tend to lack trust, confidence. They have a very critical inner voice. A high level of shame. I don't know if you guys will discuss shame in your school or not, but that is super important to look at. Even as adults, they communicate through whining or hitting. Even there's just like a physical manifestation. They can't connect what they want with words, so they'll use different methods. They enter into negative relationships. They avoid emotional connection, like putting a shell around those soft emotions, and hides in his intellect. So oftentimes the avoidant person becomes an avoidant adult who hides behind emotional intelligence. So therefore you don't really get to know who they really are, because there's that wall. They may not be as connected to family or community because they've learned to distrust so very early in their lives. Yes, they can be loners, but they're mostly cerebral and don't express their emotions. The typical response to an argument or conflict or stress is to become distant and uncaring. They tend to have an overly positive view of themselves and a negative, cynical attitude towards other people. Okay, that was 45 minutes, but let me I'll just finish up with the last category. It's much smaller, much shorter. So insecure attachments, with both of those, avoidant and ambivalent, have similar attachments to God. So the way that they were treated, they see God the same way. So they can view God as remote and inaccessible, emotionally distant God, abandoning them in times of need, or harshly judgmental. They can have like a quick conversion to faith, but when the going gets tough, they will walk away from the faith. Oops. When it is perceived that God, look at my typing, that God is acting towards them as their parents did, that's when it gets really hard for them. So it's not a deep sort of faith because there's not a trust there. So when we look at faith development without significant intervention, this is the group of people that are generally walking away from the faith, and they will stay away from God because there is no connection there. So that's why doing the inner work is so important, because you have to be able to have doubt. You have to be able to question God and know that you can come back. And so it's this category of adults that are usually the ones that are leaving the church, as we know, they're leaving the faith, they're walking away, and they're not coming back. Okay, the last one. This is the category that I worked with, mostly in Cape Town. And it's a much less common attachment style, but it's called disorganized attachment. And this happens in abusive situations. So when the parent or the caregiver is abusive to the child experiences physical and emotional frightening behavior that is life-threatening. So then, as you know, when you're frightened, you have elevated fight or flight mechanisms. Your adrenaline starts going, cortisol is released, and your body's in constant stress and constant trauma, which is really bad for your organs, really bad for your body. They have this conflict because as a child, you want your parent to be the person that is providing safety to you, but at the same time, that person that is providing safety to you is also the person that is terrifying you. So they live in this very complex world where they don't know where to turn, because it's this dual life that they have, and they can't really make sense of things. It's tragic. But then this also produces generational trauma. So kids that usually live in disorganized attachment, that can be passed from generation to generation because it goes largely unresolved. And so that is what is passed on. Yeah, and as you can imagine, the adults have difficulty managing stress. They can be aggressive. They have difficulty trusting people. They're emotionally detached, unable to self-soothe. They're unpredictable, erratic. There's a general sense of either excessive dependency on someone, or they anticipate being rejected. So they live with like a sense of impending abandonment with people, because it was either, you know, I'm going to feed you, or, you know, we're going to have some, you know, there could be a fight, there could be abuse of some sort in the house. So disorganized is really quite traumatic and quite sad. And the ability to self-soothe, it was one of the marked behaviors that I noticed was not there in a lot of people that I worked with. They just could not come down off of an event or a situation. You know, they just could not let it go. Whereas a securely attached person will be able to talk through it. One of the ladies, she had a knife pulled on her at the bus stop, and what that did was just trigger a whole bunch of other trauma that had happened to her later in life. And it didn't matter, you know, what we talked about. You can say like, okay, you're safe now. We're gonna, I mean, you can't call the police in that community because the police don't go in, but, you know, we're going to talk to a social worker. We're going to get you some help. We're going to do this. That doesn't matter. You know, everything was then connected to all the past trauma, and it just goes in cycle on repeat. So as you can imagine, the disorganized attachment to God, God can be seen as very condemning, full of condemnation, punishing. God is always unhappy with them, and they will struggle to have an emotional connection with God unless there's something done.